The scream came just before midnight. A child's voice, sharp, terrified, pleading, cut through the silence of the Hale mansion like broken glass. "Please don't lock me in the dark room again." The cry echoed down the marble hallway, bouncing off cold walls and dying into an unbearable quiet. The staff froze. No one dared move. In that house, silence wasn't peace, it was obedience. Elena Moore stood near the staircase, a folded blanket in her hands. She had arrived only that morning, still learning the rhythm of the household, when to speak, when to disappear. But that voice, so raw and small, made her drop everything. The sound came from upstairs. For a moment, she thought it might be the wind. Then came another cry, weaker this time, as if muffled by a door. "Please, I'll be good, don't close it." Her instincts kicked in. She took a few steps forward, glancing toward the older housekeeper, Mrs. Wells, who shook her head quickly. A silent warning. "Don't," the woman mouthed, her lips trembling. Elena hesitated. Every fiber of her body told her to move, to help, but something about the atmosphere, the heavy air, the watchful eyes, told her to be careful. Still, she couldn't unhear that plea. From the second-floor corridor, footsteps approached, heavy, deliberate, followed by the metallic click of a lock. Then, quiet. The crying stopped. A door creaked open at the end of the hall, and the butler, Mr. Reed, appeared. His face was expressionless. "Back to your quarters, Miss Moore," he said calmly, though his voice held the kind of calm that trembles at the edges. "What was that?" she asked, her voice low but firm. "Nothing that concerns you," he said. "The child has episodes." "Episodes?" she repeated. He nodded once. "The doctor said it's best she stays calm in familiar spaces. Please don't interfere." The way he said it, soft, rehearsed, didn't feel like care. It felt like protocol. Elena wanted to ask more, but the fear in Mrs. Wells's eyes stopped her. Later that night, she lay awake in her small guest room on the east side of the mansion, listening. The walls here had memories. They creaked like they wanted to speak. Somewhere in the distance, she heard the faint hum of a generator and the slow ticking of an antique clock. And then, faintly, the sob of a child. It wasn't loud, but it was steady, rhythmic, like a broken lullaby. Elena pressed her ear to the wall, her heart pounding. The sound seemed to come from behind it, the West Wing. She knew from her orientation that the West Wing was off limits. The doors there were always locked, the lights always off. She whispered to herself, "Who locks a child in the dark?" By dawn, the mansion was back to its pristine order. The maids moved like ghosts, polished brass, folded linens, and avoided each other's eyes. The only sound was the soft hum of a vacuum and the clink of dishes. No one mentioned the night before. At breakfast, Elena saw the little girl for the first time. She was sitting at the far end of the dining table, her hands folded neatly in her lap. 8, maybe 9 years old, blonde curls pulled back by a blue ribbon, skin pale enough to glow in the morning light. But her eyes, that's what caught Elena. They were wide, glassy, and restless, darting from shadow to shadow. When the light flickered from a chandelier above, the girl flinched and covered her ears. "Good morning, Miss Ivy," Mrs. Wells said softly, setting a bowl of fruit in front of her. The girl didn't answer. Elena wanted to smile, to say hello, but before she could, Mr. Reed appeared again. "No chatter at meals," he warned, his tone polite but edged. Ivy lifted a spoon, her hand trembling slightly. The spoon clinked against the bowl. Then she whispered, so faintly only Elena caught it, "Don't let them turn off the light." Her small voice sent a shiver down Elena's spine. Moments later, the front doors opened. The air changed. Footsteps, confident, deliberate, echoed through the entry hall. The staff straightened immediately. "Mr. Hale is home," Mrs. Wells whispered. Elena turned just as Leonard Hale entered the room. He was tall, mid-40s, sharply dressed even at breakfast, his dark suit pressed, his silver watch glinting under the light. His expression carried the weariness of a man who had forgotten how to rest. He walked past everyone without a glance, his eyes fixed on his daughter. For a brief second, a softness flickered in his face, then vanished. "Has she behaved?" he asked, his voice calm, controlled. Mr. Reed nodded. "Mostly, sir." Leonard's gaze shifted toward Elena. "You're the new one," he said. "Yes, sir," she replied. "I trust you follow instructions." Of course." "Good," he said. "You'll find this house quiet." Keep it that way. He turned to his daughter. Eat your breakfast, Ivy. She nodded quickly, eyes lowered. As Leonard walked away, sunlight poured in through the tall windows. For a second, the light hit his face, and Elena saw it. Not cruelty, not indifference, something worse. Guilt. When the doors closed behind him, Ivy looked up. Her lips moved silently, almost prayer-like. Elena watched her, a pit forming in her stomach. She didn't know what was wrong in that house yet, but she could feel it in the walls, in the silence, in the way everyone looked away from the dark. Later, as she passed through the west hallway with her cleaning supplies, she noticed one door that didn't match the rest. Iron hinges, black paint peeling at the corners. The brass handle was worn, like it had been turned 1,000 times. Above it, a faint scratch, letters carved by a small hand. Don't. Elena stepped closer, her reflection dim in the old doorknob. From the other side came a sound, a whisper. She froze. It wasn't the wind this time. It was a voice, small, trembling, familiar. Please, don't turn off the light. By morning, the Hale mansion looked as if nothing had happened. The marble floors gleamed, sunlight filtered through sheer curtains, and the air smelled faintly of jasmine polish. But the peace was a lie, the kind that money buys to hide noise, grief, and guilt. The staff moved quietly, like figures in a ritual they had memorized long ago. Each knew their timing, when to enter a room, when to vanish before Mr. Hale appeared. No one mentioned the screams from the night before. No one even dared to look toward the west hallway, where the dark room slept behind its iron door. Elena watched all this as she served breakfast in the smaller dining hall reserved for staff. The others avoided her eyes. When she finally spoke, casual, testing. The little girl seemed frightened last night. The spoon in Mrs. Wells's hand stopped mid-air. Best not to talk about it, the woman said softly, glancing toward the hallway. Mr. Hale doesn't tolerate gossip. It isn't gossip if a child's afraid, Elena replied. The butler, Mr. Reed, appeared at the door as if summoned by the words. Miss Moore, he said firmly, your duties are in the east wing today, the nursery, the playroom, and the sitting parlor. Please remember, no one enters the west corridor. The way he said it, not don't go, but no one enters, made the rule feel older than the house itself. Elena nodded, but inside her mind was already asking questions. Why would a house with 20 rooms have one that no one could enter? And why was a child terrified of it? The mansion itself was enormous, yet lifeless. Hallways stretched endlessly, lined with portraits of Hale ancestors, each face painted with the same detached expression. The eyes followed her as she passed. The air felt too cold for a home. In the playroom, she found Ivy sitting on a velvet rug, surrounded by toys that looked untouched, rows of dolls, polished blocks, books arranged by color. Everything perfect, everything sterile. Good morning, Elena said softly, kneeling beside her. The girl looked up slowly. Her eyes were a pale gray, almost translucent in the light. She gave a polite nod but didn't speak. Elena began dusting the shelves, letting the silence breathe. After a while, Ivy's small voice broke it. Did you hear the crying last night? Elena froze. Crying? The girl nodded. It came from the dark room, but don't tell Mr. Reed. He says it's just the pipes. Elena set down the duster. And what do you think? Ivy hesitated. Pipes don't say my name. The words hung in the air like frost. Elena tried to steady her tone. Who says your name, Ivy? The girl's lips trembled. Sometimes, Mommy. Elena's chest tightened. She had read that Mr. Hale's wife, Margot, had died 3 years ago. A tragic fall, the paper said. After that, he'd withdrawn from society, stopped attending charity events, cut off most contact. But Ivy was looking straight at her, her small hands twisting the ribbon on her dress. She comes when it's dark. That's why I can't sleep. Elena swallowed hard. What does she do when she comes? She knocks on the walls, Ivy whispered. And sometimes she cries. I think she wants me to come play in the dark room again. The word again struck like lightning. Before Elena could respond, the door opened. Mr. Reed stepped in with the precision of a man who never entered a room without knowing what had been said. Miss Moore, he said, voice smooth as glass, Mr. Hale requests your presence in the library. Elena followed him down the long corridor, heart pounding. The library was vast, lined with shelves from floor to ceiling, smelling of leather and dust. Leonard Hale stood by the window, sunlight outlining the sharp edges of his face. "You're settling in?" he asked, not looking at her. "Yes, sir." He nodded absently. "Ivy mentioned you sat with her last night." "I did," Elena said carefully. "She seemed frightened." His jaw tightened. "She has night terrors. They come and go. You mustn't encourage them. Attention makes them worse." "With respect," Elena said, "fear doesn't vanish when you ignore it." For the first time, his eyes met hers, cold gray, like his daughter's. "You were hired to maintain order, not analyze my child." "I understand," she said softly, but she begged not to be locked in the dark. That doesn't sound like a dream. Something flickered across his face, pain or anger, she couldn't tell. "My wife used to say the same thing," he murmured, almost to himself. "She was ill. Delusions." He turned away, voice lower now. "The staff knows the rules for a reason. Some rooms in this house carry too much of the past." Elena studied him. For all his control, he looked exhausted, the kind of exhaustion that comes from carrying something heavy and invisible. "Mr. Hale," she said quietly, "children don't invent fear. They inherit it." He looked back at her sharply, but before he could answer, a sudden noise broke through the stillness, a door slamming somewhere down the west hall. Both turned instinctively toward the sound. "That wing is sealed," he said, frowning. "No one's in there." Another sound followed, faint rhythmic tapping, like fingernails on wood. Elena whispered, "It's coming from the dark room." Mr. Hale stared at her for a moment, then turned back to his desk, dismissing it. "This house creaks," he said flatly. "Old walls, old ghosts. Don't let them get to you." But as she left the library, she caught a glimpse of his reflection in the glass, pale, strained, his hand gripping the edge of the desk until his knuckles went white. That night, when the house grew quiet again, Elena stood in the hallway outside the locked west door. The silence pressed against her ears. Then, from the other side, a whisper, the same soft voice as before, childlike and pleading. "Please, keep the lights on. She's in here with me." Elena's breath caught. Her candle flickered. The house exhaled, long and low, like it had been holding its breath for years. By the third day, Elena began to understand the rhythm of Ivy's world. It wasn't built around time or meals or play. It was built around light. Every movement, every breath, every rule in that mansion revolved around keeping darkness at bay. The child's curtains stayed open 24 hours a day. Lamps in her room burned constantly, even during naps. The one time the bulbs dimmed from a storm, Ivy screamed so violently that 3 maids dropped their trays. Elena saw it all from the doorway, her chest tightening with each cry. She wasn't frightened of the child's fear. She was frightened of what caused it. When Ivy finally calmed, she sat huddled in a corner clutching a stuffed white rabbit, her eyes darting toward every shadow like they were alive. Elena approached slowly. "It's all right, sweetheart. The power's back. Look, see? It's bright again." The girl didn't respond. She pressed her cheek against the toy's fur and whispered something Elena barely caught. "Mommy doesn't like the dark either." The words carried such certainty that they felt rehearsed, as if Ivy repeated them every night before sleep. Elena sat beside her on the rug. "What happened to your mommy, Ivy?" "She went into the dark room," the girl said, voice trembling, "and didn't come out." Elena froze. The air in the room felt colder. She remembered Leonard's curt explanation, "My wife was ill," and the butler's repeated warnings to stay out of the west wing. "What is the dark room?" Elena asked softly. "The place with no stars," Ivy said. "They said it makes the bad thoughts go away, but I didn't have bad thoughts." The phrasing was too adult, too practiced. Those weren't a child's words. They were something she'd heard and absorbed. Before Elena could press further, the door creaked open. Mrs. Wells stepped in, face pale. "Miss Moore, Mr. Hale is requesting you downstairs. He's leaving for a business meeting." Elena rose reluctantly. "I'll be right back, Ivy. Keep the lights on, all right?" Ivy nodded, eyes following her until the door closed. Downstairs, Leonard Hale stood in the foyer, adjusting his cufflinks. The driver waited by the door, holding his briefcase. He looked exhausted again, but immaculate, the kind of man who tried to control the world because he couldn't control his past. "Miss Moore," he said without looking up, "I assume Ivy's settled." "She still has trouble sleeping," Elena replied carefully. "She said her mother—" He cut her off with a sharp motion. Don't indulge her fantasies. It doesn't sound like fantasy, sir. It sounds like memory. Leonard's eyes lifted slowly, cold but hollow. You weren't here when Margot was alive. You didn't see what she became. She filled that child's head with stories. That's what you're hearing now. Ghosts of her delusions. He snapped the watch clasp on his wrist and straightened. My daughter will not grow up trapped in those lies. Then perhaps she needs truth, Elena said quietly. For a heartbeat, his jaw clenched. Then he turned toward the door. You don't know this family, Miss Moore. Keep your focus on your duties. The car engine started outside. As he stepped out, sunlight caught his reflection in the glass, weary, broken, like a man who'd built a prison with his own grief, and called it safety. After he left, Elena climbed back upstairs. She found Ivy sitting on the windowsill, staring out at the sprawling gardens. The sunlight painted her hair gold, but her eyes looked distant, fixed on something far beyond the glass. Do you ever play outside? Elena asked. Ivy shook her head. The shadows are longer there. Would you like to go if I came with you? The girl hesitated, then nodded once, hesitant hope flickering in her expression. Elena took her hand gently. They stepped into the garden, where the afternoon light spilled across trimmed hedges and marble statues. For a moment, Ivy's face softened. She reached out to touch a rose bloom, tracing its edge like she was afraid it might vanish. It's pretty, she whispered. Yes, Elena said. Nothing to be afraid of here. But Ivy's gaze shifted toward the far end of the property where an old greenhouse stood, its glass walls cloudy with dust. Her hand tightened around Elena's. That's where they kept the dark, she said. Elena followed her stare. The greenhouse doors were chained shut, but one pane was cracked open. Inside, the air looked thick, the kind of place where secrets didn't die, just waited. Before Elena could ask, a sharp voice called from the veranda. Mr. Reed again. Miss Moore, the child's not to wander unsupervised. She's with me, Elena replied. Then keep her inside. Mr. Hale dislikes exposure. Exposure. The word didn't mean sunlight, it meant attention. That evening, Ivy sat at her desk drawing with colored pencils. Her picture showed a small figure inside a black square. Outside, it stood another, taller, holding a key. Who's that? Elena asked. Ivy didn't look up. That's you. Elena's breath caught. And this? The square? The dark room, Ivy said simply. You'll open it. Soon? Elena stared at the paper, feeling a chill she couldn't explain. When Ivy finally fell asleep that night, the lamps glowed around her like sentinels. Elena stayed in the chair beside the bed, too uneasy to leave. Sometime after midnight, she heard it, faint, rhythmic knocking again, this time closer, not from the hallway, from beneath the floor. 3 slow knocks, then silence. Ivy stirred in her sleep and murmured, She's back. Elena's candle flickered violently. The house seemed to breathe, the old wood groaning as if something inside it had shifted, awakened. She rose quietly, every instinct telling her to stay, every nerve insisting she couldn't. The sound faded, swallowed by stillness. But just before dawn, when the first light crept across the curtains, a shadow moved across the far wall, small, childlike, and standing perfectly still. Elena turned. Ivy was still asleep. Rain had begun to fall that night, soft at first, then harder, tapping against the tall windows like impatient fingers. The sound filled the halls and the lights flickered with each rumble of thunder. Elena sat awake in her room, a candle burning low beside her. She couldn't shake the image of the drawing Ivy had made, the small figure trapped in a black square. You'll open it soon, the girl had said. Sleep wouldn't come. Something about the house felt alive during storms, as though the wind stirred its memories. Around midnight, a sudden creak echoed down the east hall, slow and deliberate. Elena reached for her robe and stepped outside. The corridor was dim, the lamps glowed weakly. At the far end, a faint light shimmered beneath the door that led to the forbidden west wing. She hesitated, heart pounding. The rule had been clear, no one enters that corridor. But the door wasn't fully shut. It stood slightly ajar, swaying with the draft. She took a step forward, then another. The west hallway smelled different, faintly of metal, damp wood, and something sour beneath it. The floorboards moaned softly under her weight. Paintings hung crooked on the walls, and a single long rug stretched into the darkness like a tongue leading her in. The whisper came again. not from far, from the end of the hall. "Please, don't turn off the light." Elena's breath caught. That voice, Ivy's. She quickened her pace, the light from her candle trembling across the walls. At the very end of the corridor stood a black-painted door with rusted hinges. The air around it felt heavy, thick with something she couldn't name. Her fingers brushed the handle. Cold. She pushed gently. The door resisted, then gave way with a slow groan. The smell hit first. Stale air, dust and disinfectant long dried. Her candlelight revealed a room far smaller than she'd imagined, its walls covered in old gray insulation panels. There were straps hanging from the wall, metal rings bolted into the floor, and an overturned stool. Against one side sat a rusted iron bed frame. The candle flickered, throwing her shadow over the walls. And in that moment, she noticed something carved into the plaster near the bed, a single word etched by shaking hands. "Mommy!" Her stomach turned. There were old medical papers scattered across a metal table, yellowed, damp. She picked one up and squinted in the dim light. Patient, Margot Hale. Treatment, sensory confinement therapy. Her pulse raced. She read further. Phrases jumped out in fragments. Disassociation episodes, isolation response, light sensitivity control. Then, a line near the bottom. Subject's daughter observed during initial test. Mild distress, inconclusive behavioral link. She stared at the date. It was from 8 years ago, the year Ivy was born. Elena's candle flickered violently. She turned toward the sound of movement, faint footsteps behind her. "Ivy?" she whispered. But when she turned, no one stood in the doorway. The hall was empty. Only the storm outside answered, lightning flashing briefly through the narrow window slits. She took one careful step back toward the exit, but her foot hit something soft. She looked down, a small stuffed rabbit soaked with dust. Ivy's toy. Her heart sank. The girl had been here before. She grabbed the papers, folded them quickly, and stepped out, closing the door behind her. The lock was broken. It couldn't have kept anyone out. Or in. Halfway down the hall, she stopped. A figure stood at the other end, tall, still, face hidden in shadow. "Elena," a voice said. It was Leonard Hale. She froze. His expression was unreadable, caught in the half-light. "I told you never to come here," he said quietly. "I heard your daughter," she replied. "She was calling from this room." He walked closer, rain dripping from his hair and coat. "You don't understand what that place is." "Then explain it to me," she said, trembling. "Why does your child think her mother still lives in there?" He stopped inches from her. His voice dropped low. "Because she watched her die in that room." The words struck like thunder. "She was ill," he continued, voice tight. "The doctor said sensory confinement would help with her episodes. I agreed because I didn't know what else to do. I thought it was treatment." Elena's eyes widened. "You let them lock her in there." He looked away, jaw clenched. "I didn't know the extent. By the time I found out, it was too late." Lightning flashed across his face, revealing a man not cruel, but hollowed out by regret. "After Margot died," he said, "I sealed this wing. I wanted Ivy to forget." "She hasn't," Elena whispered. "She remembers everything." He turned toward the door. "I should have burned this place to the ground." "Then do it now," she said, her voice trembling but firm. "Or your daughter will keep living in its shadow." Leonard didn't answer. His eyes lingered on the black door, on the faint word carved into it, before he finally turned and walked away. Elena stood alone for a long moment, the papers clutched in her hand. The candlelight flickered across the hall, dancing over portraits whose painted faces seemed to watch her every move. As she started back toward her room, a faint sound followed her, a child's hum, soft, familiar. She stopped, holding her breath. The melody came from behind the black door, a lullaby. Off-key but unmistakable. Elena whispered, "Margot?" The sound stopped. Then, faintly from the other side, a whisper, almost tender. "She's waiting for you, too." For 2 days after discovering the black room, Elena barely slept. Every time she closed her eyes, she saw the carved word, "Mommy," glowing faintly in the dark. The whisper from behind the door replayed in her mind, until she wasn't sure whether it had been real or a trick of exhaustion. Leonard Hale had not spoken to her since that night. He left the following morning without a word, his car pulling down the long rain-soaked driveway before dawn. The mansion felt colder without him, not emptier, but heavier. Secrets, she thought, have weight, and this house was collapsing under them. The staff carried on as usual. Meals were served on time, curtains drawn, polished silver, quiet compliance. No one mentioned the West Wing. When Elena passed that corridor, she noticed the door had been sealed again, a new padlock hanging from the handle. But even locked, it didn't feel silent. The air near it still vibrated faintly, as if memory itself had a pulse. That afternoon, Elena found Ivy in the music room, sitting at an old piano. The girl's hands hovered above the keys, hesitant, like she was afraid to wake the instrument. "That's beautiful," Elena said gently. "I'm not playing," Ivy whispered. "It's playing itself." Elena frowned and stepped closer. The piano lid was closed, the room perfectly still. No music, only Ivy's reflection trembling in the polished wood. "What makes you think it's playing?" The girl's gaze stayed fixed on the piano. "I hear her sometimes. Mommy used to play at night. When the lights go out, the music comes back." Elena knelt beside her. "Does it make you scared?" "Sometimes." Ivy's voice softened. "But sometimes it makes me feel like she's still here." Elena reached for her small hand. "People we love don't always leave, Ivy. Sometimes they stay in ways we can't see." The child looked at her, eyes wide. "Then why does she cry?" The question pierced deeper than Elena expected. She didn't answer right away. Instead, she glanced toward the hallway mirror across from the piano, a tall, antique thing framed in gold. For a moment, she could have sworn. She saw movement behind her reflection, a pale outline, a woman's silhouette. She blinked, and it was gone. That evening, Mrs. Wells came to her quietly while the rest of the staff dined. Her voice trembled as she spoke. "You went into that room, didn't you?" Elena didn't deny it. The old woman sighed. "You shouldn't have. Some things are meant to stay buried." "What happened to her, Mrs. Wells? To Mrs. Hale?" The woman hesitated. "She was kind once, fragile, but kind. After Ivy was born, something changed. The doctor said she suffered from severe postpartum psychosis, visions, voices, sleeplessness. She would walk the halls at night, talking to the walls, crying about light and shadows. Mr. Hale brought specialists, expensive ones. One of them convinced him that treatment in isolation could help." "Isolation?" Elena repeated, her voice cracking. Mrs. Wells nodded. "That room wasn't always dark. It used to be filled with lights, bright enough to burn your eyes. They thought sensory control could reset her mind, but instead, it broke her. One night, she escaped. They found her by the stairs. The fall killed her instantly." Elena felt cold spread through her chest. "And Ivy saw?" "She was just a baby," the woman whispered. "But you know how children remember things they shouldn't? Mr. Hale tried to erase it. He told her mother went away. But sometimes truth stains you before you even understand it." A clock struck 7. The sound echoed through the walls like a heartbeat. Elena stood. "She's not crazy, Mrs. Wells. She's remembering." The woman's face tightened. "Be careful. Mr. Hale won't forgive anyone who brings those memories back." That night, a storm rolled in again. Lightning illuminated the windows in white flashes, each one revealing fleeting glimpses of the house, the portraits, the hallways, the doors that didn't close all the way. Elena sat by her candlelight, reading through the papers she had taken from the dark room. One line caught her eye. Subject responded negatively to extended darkness. Alternate sensory exposure recommended. At the bottom of the page, a name had been signed in elegant handwriting, Dr. Darla Finn. The name struck a faint bell in her mind. She had seen it on a medicine bottle in Ivy's cabinet the day she unpacked. Eye drops, prescribed to calm visual hypersensitivity. Elena set the papers down. Something about this treatment, the darkness, the medication, the confinement, wasn't therapy. It was control. Thunder cracked overhead. Her candle flickered violently. And then, a sound. A soft knock at her door. 3 times. When she opened it, no one was there. Only the hallway stretched out in silence. But as she looked down, she saw footprints, small, bare, and wet, leading away from her door toward the West Wing. "Ivy," she whispered. She grabbed her lantern and followed. The air smelled faintly of rain and something floral. Lilac, Margot's perfume, though Elena had never seen a bottle of it in the house. The footprints led all the way to the forbidden door. The new padlock hung broken, swinging gently. "Ivy?" she called again, stepping inside. The room was darker than before. Her lantern barely reached the corners. The bed frame was empty, the papers gone from the table. But on the wall, something new had been written, the same childlike handwriting as before, carved fresh into the plaster. "Mommy's not gone." A rustle behind her made her spin. Ivy stood there in her white nightdress, holding the stuffed rabbit. Her eyes reflected the lantern's light, unblinking. "I told you she comes here," the girl whispered. "She wants me to stay." Elena's voice trembled. "No, sweetheart, your mother wouldn't want you in this place." Ivy tilted her head. "Then why did she sing to me just now?" Lightning flashed, and for a split second, behind Ivy, the mirror on the far wall reflected a woman's figure standing close, pale, hair flowing, face too blurred to see. Elena's lantern wavered, her heart hammering. When the light steadied, the reflection was gone. Only Ivy remained, small and shaking. Elena knelt and pulled her close. "It's over, Ivy. You're safe." But deep inside, she wasn't sure if that was a promise she could keep or a lie she desperately needed to believe. The following morning broke gray and heavy, the sky a solid lid over the estate. The storm had left the garden soaked, leaves clinging to the windows like damp paper. Inside, the house smelled of rain and candle wax. Elena stood in the breakfast room, pouring tea she had no appetite for, her thoughts replaying the night like a fever dream. Ivy in the dark room, the broken lock, the reflection in the mirror that vanished as soon as the light returned. By mid-morning, the familiar sound of tires crunching over gravel reached her ears. A black car rolled up the drive, its windows streaked with rain. Leonard Hale had returned. He entered with the same commanding presence as always, tall, coat damp, briefcase in hand. Yet something in his face had changed. His usual mask of control seemed thinner, stretched over exhaustion and unease. His gaze landed on Elena immediately. "Miss Moore," he said, setting his gloves on the console table, "join me in the study." The butler and maids vanished almost instantly, melting into the walls like shadows fleeing sunlight. The house seemed to hold its breath. Elena followed him down the hall. The study was dim despite the daylight, curtains drawn, fireplace cold. Leonard closed the door behind them with quiet finality. "I hear you've been wandering at night," he said evenly, taking off his coat. "I've been checking on Ivy," Elena replied. "She's been frightened again." His voice sharpened. "You took her into the West Wing." She didn't deny it. "I heard her crying. She was in that room, Mr. Hale, the one you told me to stay away from." He froze mid-motion. "That's impossible. It's locked." "Was," she said softly. "Someone broke the padlock." He turned toward her slowly, disbelief twisting into dread. "You're saying my daughter went in there?" "Yes, and she wasn't alone." The silence that followed was suffocating. Outside, a branch scraped against the window pane, a sound like fingernails dragging over glass. Leonard exhaled sharply, gripping the back of his chair. That room should have been sealed forever. "Then why does it still exist?" Elena demanded. "You keep calling it a place of illness, but it's a prison, Mr. Hale. Your wife was tortured in there, not treated, and your daughter has been haunted by it ever since." His face went white. "You don't understand what happened here." "Then help me," she said. "Explain it." He turned away, staring at the rain sliding down the window. When he finally spoke, his voice was quieter, tired, cracked. "Margot was unwell. She saw things, heard voices. After Ivy was born, she refused to let anyone near the child. She said the light hurt her eyes, that shadows followed her around the room. I called every doctor I could find, and they all said the same. She was losing her mind. Then Dr. Darla Finn arrived." Elena stiffened at the name. "She promised to cure Margot," he continued, "said she'd pioneered sensory therapy, isolation in a controlled environment to quiet the mind. I wanted to believe her. I paid whatever she asked. But when Margot got worse, Darla told me it was a necessary phase. By the time I realized the truth, Margot was gone." He rubbed his forehead, as if trying to erase the memory. "You blamed yourself," Elena said gently. "I tried to protect Ivy from it," he whispered, "from everything. But now it's all come back." Elena stepped closer. "Dr. Finn's name is on Ivy's medicine bottles. You're still letting her treat your daughter." Leonard's head snapped up. "That's impossible." Darla left the practice after Margot's death. She didn't leave, Elena said. She changed her title, Pediatric Neurology. I checked the prescription labels myself. She's been medicating Ivy under the guise of preventive treatment. For a moment, he just stared at her, the color draining from his face. Then he moved toward the phone on his desk, dialing with trembling fingers. "Reed," he barked when the butler answered. "Fetch every medicine bottle from Ivy's cabinet, now!" Minutes later, Reed returned with a small tray, 4 amber vials labeled visual desensitization drops. Dr. D. Finn. Leonard's hand shook as he held one to the light. "How long has she been taking this?" "Since before I arrived," Elena said. "Mrs. Wells told me it was part of her routine." Leonard slammed the vial down, glass cracking. "I thought I was protecting her. I've been feeding her the same poison that killed her mother." His voice broke on the last word. For the first time since she'd met him, Elena saw tears gather in his eyes. Not dramatic, just raw, involuntary. He sank into his chair, the weight of years settling on him. "I didn't kill Margot," he said, more to himself than her. "But I didn't save her either. And now I've done the same to Ivy." Elena approached quietly. "You can still save her, Mr. Hale. But you have to face the truth." He looked up at her, eyes hollow. "The truth destroyed this house once already." "Then maybe it's time it burned again," she said softly. A knock interrupted them. Reed appeared at the door, pale. "Sir," he said hesitantly, "the child isn't in her room." Leonard's chair scraped against the floor as he stood. "What do you mean?" "The window was open," Reed stammered, "and there's a trail of mud leading to the west wing." Elena felt her pulse quicken. Without another word, Leonard grabbed a lantern from the wall and strode toward the forbidden corridor. Elena followed close behind. The air grew colder as they entered the west hall. The door at the end, the black door, stood wide open. Inside, the darkness seemed to breathe. "Ivy!" Leonard shouted, his voice echoing through the chamber. A small sound answered, a whisper. "Daddy?" The lantern's light caught a pale figure crouched beside the iron bed frame. Ivy, clutching her rabbit, eyes wide. He rushed forward, kneeling. "Sweetheart, what are you doing here?" "She said I belong here," Ivy murmured. Leonard's hands trembled as he lifted her. "No, baby, no one belongs here." From somewhere behind them, the mirror glimmered faintly, and for a heartbeat, both adults saw a reflection that didn't match the room. A woman standing behind Leonard, her hand on his shoulder, face hidden by hair. The lantern flickered violently, then went out. In the dark, Ivy whispered again, voice almost peaceful. "She's home." The lantern flickered back to life, its weak glow spilling over the cold floor. The reflection in the mirror was gone. Only the three of them remained, Leonard, Ivy, and Elena, frozen in a silence thick enough to feel. Ivy clung to her father's neck, her small fingers digging into his coat. Leonard held her tightly, his eyes darting around the room as though he expected the walls themselves to move. Elena took a cautious step forward. "Mr. Hale, we need to get her out of here." He nodded mutely and stood, cradling his daughter. But as he turned toward the door, something on the far wall caught Elena's eye, an outline in the grime, like a square cut into the plaster. She set her lantern down and brushed her hand over it. The surface gave a faint metallic sound. "There's something behind this panel," she whispered. Leonard stopped. "Leave it." But she didn't. Her fingers found a small latch hidden in the wall's molding. With a creak, the panel shifted open. Behind it, a narrow cavity revealed itself. Inside were dozens of sealed envelopes, photographs, and a tape recorder wrapped in plastic. The edges of the papers were yellowed, the ink smudged from time. Elena reached in carefully and pulled one envelope free. The handwriting was delicate but unmistakable. Margot Hale. Leonard's face drained of color. "Where did you—" "Here," Elena said, handing him the letter. He hesitated before tearing it open. The paper trembled in his hands. As he read, his voice cracked. "To whoever finds this, if Leonard still believes Darla Finn can help me, then I'm already lost. The treatments make me see things that aren't there, and silence things that are. I hear Ivy crying in the dark, but they say it's my mind turning against me. If anything happens to me, find the tapes. They know the truth." Leonard's hand shook so badly that the letter slipped from his grip. "Tapes," he muttered. "She said tapes." Elena picked up the recorder from the niche, its plastic covering stiff with dust. She pressed the play button. For a moment, only static filled the room. Then a voice emerged, weak, strained, familiar. Session 47. Patient Margot Hale, Dr. Darla Finn presiding. The subject is uncooperative today. Increased dosage by 40 milligrams. Margot's voice followed, trembling. Please, not again. Not in the dark. The sound of a slap echoed faintly through the recording. Then silence. Leonard staggered backward, his breath coming in ragged gasps. I thought it was therapy. She told me it was working. Elena's eyes were wet. It wasn't treatment, Leonard. It was punishment. He looked at his daughter, her head resting against his shoulder. She's been living with this, hearing it, feeling it, every day. Another noise filled the recorder, metal clinking, restraints tightening, and then Darla's voice again, smooth and clinical. Observe the daughter's reaction. She appears unaffected by the mother's distress. Ivy stirred in her father's arms, whimpering softly. Elena shut the recorder off. The silence that followed was unbearable. Leonard whispered, I let that woman near my family, twice. Elena placed a hand on his arm. Then you can end it now. He looked at her with hollow eyes. I don't even know where to begin. Start by exposing her, she said. You have the evidence, the letters, the tapes. He nodded slowly, then turned toward the door. Get Ivy to her room. I'll deal with this. As they left the corridor, the storm outside eased into a slow drizzle. But behind them, inside the black room, the tape recorder clicked again, on its own. Margot's faint voice whispered one last line before the static swallowed it. The light was never what blinded us. It was the lies. Leonard spent the next morning in his study, the tape spread across his desk like pieces of a crime scene. Elena stood nearby, watching as he listened to each one. Margot's pleas, Darla's instructions, the sounds of restraint, of silence, of control. The truth poured from the recorder like poison finally leaking out of a wound. Every word broke something inside him. When the final tape ended, he sat still for a long time, staring at nothing. Then, in a voice raw from quiet, he said, I'm calling the authorities. Mrs. Wells, pale and trembling, stepped into the room. Sir, if this becomes public... He cut her off. It has to. This isn't about reputation anymore. It's about her. He looked toward the doorway where Ivy stood in her nightgown clutching her rabbit. Elena knelt beside the girl. You're safe now, she murmured, but Ivy's eyes were fixed on her father. Daddy, she said softly, did you know they hurt Mommy? The question shattered what little composure he had left. He knelt in front of her, his voice trembling. I didn't know, sweetheart. I thought I was helping her. I was wrong. She touched his face with her small hand, her expression solemn. Then don't let them hurt anyone else. It was all he needed to hear. Within hours, Leonard made the call, to the police first, then to a private investigator he trusted. He sent the letters and tapes to them, along with the prescriptions bearing Dr. Finn's signature. The investigator promised to trace her license immediately. As the day unfolded, the house filled with a strange, restless energy. The air that had once been thick with secrecy now hummed with the weight of truth. Reporters began to gather outside the gate within days, tipped off by someone inside the medical board. The story spread fast. Wealthy family alleges experimental abuse in psychiatric facility. Leonard barely left Ivy's side. When he did, Elena stayed with the girl. The nightmares continued, less screaming now, more whispered names, but she no longer begged for the lights to stay on. She just asked to keep the window open. On the third night, as the house slept, Ellen awoke to faint voices from the study. She followed the sound and found Leonard sitting in the dark, listening to the last tape again. He didn't turn when she entered. She wasn't delusional, he said softly. She was warning me. I thought she was crazy and all she wanted was to protect Ivy. Ellen crossed the room and laid a hand on his shoulder. You believed what they told you because you loved her. That's what they preyed on. He let out a long breath. And now she's gone because of it. No, Elena said. Now she's the reason your daughter will live free. A knock at the door interrupted them. It was Reed, looking uneasy. Sir, there's a woman here asking for you. Says her name is Dr. Darla Finn. Leonard's face went rigid. Bring her in. Moments later, Darla entered the study. Her elegance was clinical, perfect posture, immaculate suit, hair swept tight. but her eyes flickered with unease when she saw the open tapes on the desk. "Leonard," she said smoothly, "you've been misled. Those sessions were confidential, taken out of context." He rose slowly. "Context?" His voice trembled with quiet fury. "You strapped my wife to a chair, drugged her, and let my child listen from the next room." Darla's calm cracked slightly. "I followed protocol. Margot was unstable." "Your protocol killed her," he said, "and you've been drugging my daughter with the same treatment." Her mask slipped completely now. "You can't prove." He picked up the recorder, pressed play. Margot's voice filled the air once more. "She's crying for me. Please don't make her watch again." The color drained from Darla's face. Elena stepped forward. "You should leave. The police are on their way." For a moment, Darla looked like she might argue, but the distant sound of sirens silenced her. She turned on her heel and left without another word. Leonard stood trembling, hands gripping the edge of his desk. He turned to Elena. "Do you believe in forgiveness?" She met his gaze, eyes soft but unwavering. "Only after the truth has been told." Outside, red and blue lights flashed through the rain. Darla Finn was arrested within the hour. When the house finally fell quiet again, Leonard went upstairs to check on Ivy. The girl was asleep, the rabbit tucked under her chin. He sat beside her bed, his voice low and breaking. "No one will ever lock you in the dark again," he whispered. For the first time in years, he believed it. The storm had passed, but the world around the Hale mansion was far from calm. News vans lined the long gravel driveway, camera lights flashing against the iron gates. Reporters shouted questions into microphones as police cars came and went. For years, the Hale name had stood for power, wealth, and discretion. Now it was a headline. Millionaire exposes medical abuse cover-up. Wife's death reopened. Inside, the staff whispered in corners. Some packed their things quietly, terrified of being dragged into scandal. Others stayed out of loyalty to Ivy, whose fragile calm had become the new center of the house. She wandered the halls barefoot, carrying her rabbit everywhere, asking small, quiet questions. Will they take Daddy away? Or, can Mommy rest now? Elna stayed close to her always. Every night, Ivy would still wake to faint sounds, echoes of chains, soft singing that wasn't there. But when Elena held her, the tremors faded faster now. Healing was coming slowly, like sunlight through fog. Leonard, meanwhile, spent his days answering questions from detectives, lawyers, and reporters. The truth spread wider than he expected. Investigators unearthed other victims, patients who had suffered under Dr. Darla Finn's sensory reprogramming across multiple facilities. Families stepped forward with stories that mirrored Margot's, their words trembling with long-buried shame. When the trial began, the courtroom was packed. Elena and Ivy sat quietly in the front row. Leonard took the stand with shaking hands but unwavering resolve. The prosecutor pressed play on the final tape. Margot's voice filled the room. "Please, not the dark again. My baby's crying. Please, she can hear me." Even the judge bowed his head. Darla Finn sat across the room, her pristine composure crumbling as the evidence mounted. Forged signatures, falsified prescriptions, and hidden patient deaths. When her lawyer tried to claim she had full consent from her clients, Leonard's voice cut through the courtroom, raw and unfiltered. "You can't consent to being broken." Silence followed. The words struck harder than any argument. When the verdict came, guilty on all counts, Ivy squeezed her father's hand. Leonard wept openly for the first time, not from pain this time, but from release. Outside, cameras flashed again, but he ignored them. He carried Ivy to the car like she was still that small, frightened child, begging not to be locked away. That night, back in the mansion, the lights burned in every window. Elena stood in the west corridor one last time, staring at the black door. The padlock had been removed, the hinges unbolted. Leonard stepped beside her. "It should be gone," he said quietly. "Yes," she replied, "but not erased. Some places need to stay as they were, to remind us what silence costs." He nodded, eyes glistening. "You're right." Together, they entered the room for the last time. The air no longer felt heavy. The shadows seemed thinner, the darkness ordinary, just the absence of light, nothing more. Leonard took one final look at the word "Mommy" carved into the wall, then turned away. Later that night, he gathered Ivy in the garden, where the moonlight washed the earth clean. She lifted her face toward the sky, blinking at the soft glow. "It's not scary anymore," she said. He smiled faintly. "No, sweetheart, not anymore." The next morning, workers sealed the west wing for good, not with locks or chains, but with sunlight. The blackened walls were torn down, the windows opened wide. For the first time in years, the house didn't feel haunted. It felt alive. Months passed. The Hale estate stood quieter now, not silent, but peacefully so. The reporters had left, the cameras faded, the story became history. What remained was something slower, gentler, rebuilding. Ivy began seeing a therapist who specialized in childhood trauma, but her real healing started outside those walls, in small moments. The first night she slept with the lamps off, the first time she ran through the garden barefoot without fear, the first time she laughed, truly laughed, at the sound of rain instead of crying because of it. Leonard watched each milestone with quiet awe. The guilt still lingered, some wounds never closed completely, but he had learned to live alongside it, to let it remind rather than consume. Every week, he donated to rehabilitation centers in Margot's name. Every month, he met with families of other victims, helping them seek justice of their own. One afternoon, as summer crept in, Elena found Ivy sitting in the drawing room surrounded by colored pencils and sheets of paper. She was sketching again, the habit she'd picked up during therapy. "What are you drawing today?" Elena asked. Ivy smiled shyly and held up her paper. The drawing showed a dark square, like a room, but this time the door was wide open. A beam of light spilled out, and outside stood a girl holding her father's hand. "It's the dark room," Ivy said softly, "but I made it pretty." Elena smiled, her throat tightening. "It's beautiful, Ivy." When Leonard entered the room later and saw the drawing, he stood still for a long time. Then he knelt beside his daughter, his voice breaking softly. "You made it something good," he whispered. "You took what hurt us and turned it into something kind." That evening, the three of them had dinner together. No servants, no guests, no tension. Just laughter. Ivy insisted on turning off the chandelier, leaving only candles burning on the table. Elena hesitated, but Ivy grinned. "See? It's not dark. It's soft." They ate by candlelight, the warm glow softening every shadow in the room. For the first time, the house didn't feel like it was hiding anything. Later that night, Leonard walked to the west garden alone. Fireflies drifted over the pond, tiny lights blinking in the quiet. He stopped near the spot where the old greenhouse once stood, now replaced by rows of roses. A small plaque glimmered under the moonlight. "In memory of Margot Hale, her light lives on." He closed his eyes and whispered, "I hope you can see her now. She's not afraid anymore." Back inside, Elena tucked Ivy into bed. The little girl yawned, clutching a rabbit. "Elena," she murmured. "Yes, dear?" "When Mommy comes to visit again, can you tell her I'm okay?" Elena brushed the girl's hair gently. "She already knows." As Ivy drifted off to sleep, the room filled with quiet peace. The moonlight spilled through the curtains, silver and soft. And for a fleeting second, Elena thought she saw a figure near the window, a woman in white, smiling faintly before fading into the light. Balcon. The hall. Leonard stood outside the door, listening to the silence that once terrified him. Now it felt sacred, a silence earned. The Hale mansion no longer hid its ghosts. It let them rest. 2 years passed. The Hale estate no longer loomed like a monument to silence. The walls were repainted in soft creams, the windows left open year-round, and laughter had replaced the echoes that once haunted every hallway. Ivy had grown taller, surer of herself. The trembling child who once begged for light had become a calm, curious girl who painted with sunlight. Her drawings filled the corridors, swirling skies, open doors, and faces smiling from the brightness beyond. Elena had stayed on as her tutor. The role suited her. She was no longer a maid but part of the family, though she never said so aloud. Leonard had offered her countless times a better position, a salary, anything she wanted, but she stayed because she couldn't bear to leave them unfinished. Healing, she'd learned, was never instant. It was built quietly, like trust. On the anniversary of the trial, the three of them visited a small memorial garden in the city, where a marble plaque bore the names of Margot Hale and the other victims. Leonard carried a white rose for each. Ivy carried her rabbit, still patched and frayed, but clean now, no longer clutched from fear. Reporters had moved on long ago, their headlines replaced by newer tragedies. But inside the garden, the quiet spoke volumes. Ivy placed her rose beneath her mother's name and whispered, "I'm not afraid of the dark anymore." Leonard rested his hand on her shoulder, eyes wet. "She'd be proud of you." Elena stepped back, letting father and daughter have their moment. The air felt warm, filled with sunlight that filtered through the trees like slow-moving gold. And for a fleeting second, she could swear she heard soft piano notes, the same lullaby Margot used to play. When they returned home, Ivy asked if she could show them something in the studio. She had been working on a large canvas for weeks, secretive about it, always turning it face down when anyone entered. Now she pulled away the cloth. The painting showed the mansion, not as it was, but as it had become. Bright windows, open doors, and a garden bursting with color. Above the roof, a faint figure stood in the light, her dress flowing, face serene. "That's Mommy," Ivy said, smiling. Elena and Leonard exchanged a look. Neither spoke. The figure seemed to shimmer under the light, like brushstrokes hiding something alive beneath. Leonard crouched beside his daughter, his voice thick. "You made her real again." Ivy tilted her head. She was never gone. That night, after Ivy went to bed, Leonard and Elena sat on the veranda in comfortable silence. The night air smelled of jasmine and rain. Fireflies blinked across the lawn like tiny stars. "She's happy now," Elena said. "She is," Leonard replied softly. "And for the first time, I think Margot might be too." They both watched the horizon for a while, where the last edge of twilight melted into night. It was dark, but gentle, safe, alive. Elena thought of all the nights filled with screams, of the black door that once symbolized pain, and of the man now sitting beside her, redeemed not by wealth but by remorse and love. "Do you ever wish you could forget?" she asked quietly. He shook his head. "No. Forgetting is how it started. Remembering is how we survive." She nodded. "Then you finally learned what Margot wanted you to." Leonard turned to her, eyes glistening in the moonlight. "What's that?" "That light doesn't save us, Leonard," she said softly. "Truth does." The house stood silent that night, wrapped in silver light. For the first time in years, every room breathed without restraint. No locked doors, no forbidden corridors, just the hum of life returning. Elena walked through the hallways one last time before bed, her candle flickering softly. In the west corridor, once the darkest part of the house, the walls gleamed with fresh paint, and the windows had been opened permanently. A faint breeze carried in the scent of roses from the garden below. She paused at the spot where the black door once stood. The floor was smooth now, the past sanded down to nothing but memory. She closed her eyes and whispered, "Rest now, Margot." Behind her, Leonard's footsteps approached. He stood beside her, hands in his pockets. "I never thanked you," he said. "You already did," she replied. He smiled faintly. "No. You saved us, me and her. You brought light where I only ever brought silence." Elena looked toward the window, where moonlight painted the floor in soft silver. "You saved yourself, Leonard. You just needed someone to remind you where to look." Down the hall, a soft sound interrupted them, the creak of a small door, followed by light footsteps. Ivy appeared, her hair tousled from sleep, clutching her rabbit by one ear. "Couldn't sleep?" Leonard asked gently. "I wanted to say good night," she said, yawning. He lifted her into his arms. "Good night, my brave girl." "Daddy?" "Yes? Can we leave the lights off tonight?" Elena's eyes met his over the child's shoulder. Leonard smiled through the sudden sting in his chest. "Of course," he said. "It's time." He carried her upstairs, the soft rhythm of his steps echoing against the walls that once held cries. Now they held peace. Elena followed them with her eyes until they vanished from view. Then she turned back toward the moonlit corridor. Somewhere, faint but real, she thought she heard the echo of a woman's laughter, quiet, content, fading into the breeze. Later that night, she wrote in her journal before sleep, something she hadn't done since her first day. There. The house no longer fears the dark. It has learned what all wounded hearts must, that light isn't the opposite of darkness. It's what grows after you've faced it and lived. In the morning, sunlight spilled through every window, and Ivy's laughter filled the air. Leonard joined her at the breakfast table, his face softer, his posture easier. The housekeeper hummed while setting plates, and the smell of coffee drifted warmly through the air. It was, finally, an ordinary morning, the kind that felt miraculous because it had once seemed impossible. As they ate, Ivy announced that she wanted to start painting lessons for other children who were scared of things they couldn't see. Leonard smiled, proud and wordless. When breakfast ended, Elena stood by the door, watching them. The years had given her purpose, but now she knew her time here was nearly over. The Hales didn't need saving anymore. They needed living. Outside, the sun rose higher, gilding the house in gold. The shadows stretched long and harmless across the garden. And somewhere, beyond the edge of sound, the piano began to play again, not a haunting tune this time, but a melody of peace, soft and free. As Elena walked out onto the veranda, the wind lifted her hair. She smiled to herself and whispered, almost as a prayer, "No one will ever lock her in the dark again." Then she stepped into the morning light, letting it wash over her face. No longer a savior, no longer a witness, but part of the life she'd helped set free. And high above the mansion, in the faint shimmer of sunlight through the glass, it seemed for just a moment that Margot Hale's reflection smiled too, radiant, unbound, and finally home.